The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Copper Ridge as Sarah McKenna clutched her 4-year-old daughter Emma closer to her chest. Both of them crouched behind an overturned wagon that had become their only shield against the chaos erupting around them. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air, mixing with the dust kicked up by panicked horses and the screams of terrified townspeople seeking cover wherever they could find it. Sarah was 12 years old, a widow who had been struggling to make ends meet since her husband's death in a mining accident 2 years earlier. Her auburn hair, usually neatly pinned back, now hung in disheveled strands around her face, and her simple blue dress was torn and stained with dirt from diving for cover. When the shooting started, Emma, with her mother's green eyes and golden curls, whimpered softly against Sarah's shoulder, too frightened to cry aloud. The crossfire had erupted suddenly and without warning. What had started as a routine Saturday afternoon in the small mining town had exploded into violence when a gang of outlaws, led by the notorious Jake Morrison, had attempted to rob the town's bank. The local sheriff and his deputies had responded quickly, but they were outnumbered and outgunned by Morrison's ruthless crew. "Mama, I'm scared," Emma whispered, her small hands gripping Sarah's dress tightly. "I know, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, trying to keep her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Just stay down and stay quiet. It'll be over soon." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah wasn't sure she believed them. The gunfight had been raging for nearly 20 minutes, and if anything, it seemed to be intensifying. Bullets whined overhead, splintering the wooden sides of buildings and sending showers of debris raining down on anyone unfortunate enough to be caught in the open. Sarah had been walking to the general store with Emma when the shooting started. They had been discussing what to buy for dinner, Emma chattering excitedly about wanting candy. When the first shots rang out, Sarah's maternal instincts had kicked in immediately, and she had grabbed Emma and dove behind the nearest cover she could find, the overturned wagon that now served as their precarious shelter. From her position, Sarah could see the bank across the street, its front windows shattered and smoke pouring from the doorway. Sheriff Tom Bradley lay motionless in the dust about 30 feet away, and Sarah couldn't tell if he was dead or just wounded. Two of Morrison's men were positioned behind a water trough, firing methodically at the remaining deputies who had taken cover in the barber shop. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Sarah realized with growing horror that she and Emma were trapped in the middle of what was essentially a war zone. The overturned wagon provided some protection, but it wouldn't hold up against sustained gunfire, and she had no way to get Emma to safety without exposing them both to the deadly crossfire. It was then that she saw him. A young Apache boy, more than 12 or 13 years old, was moving with incredible stealth and grace along the edges of the battlefield. He wore traditional Apache clothing, buckskin pants, and a simple shirt, with his long black hair braided and adorned with a single eagle feather. His dark eyes were alert and intelligent, scanning the chaos with a kind of tactical awareness that seemed far beyond his years. Sarah watched in amazement as the boy navigated through the gunfight like a ghost, using every piece of cover available, doorways, barrels, abandoned carts, to move closer to where she and Emma were trapped. It was clear that he had spotted them and was deliberately making his way toward their position, but Sarah couldn't understand why. The relationship between the townspeople of Copper Ridge and the local Apache tribes had always been tense at best. There had been conflicts in the past, misunderstandings that had sometimes escalated into violence. Most of the white settlers viewed the Apache with suspicion and fear, while the Apache had every reason to distrust the encroaching settlers who were steadily claiming more and more of their ancestral lands. But this boy seemed different. There was something in his eyes, a compassion and determination that transcended the racial and cultural barriers that divided their peoples. As he drew closer, Sarah could see that he was focused entirely on reaching them, apparently oblivious to the danger he was putting himself in. A bullet struck the wagon just inches from Sarah's head, sending splinters of wood flying. Emma cried out in terror, and Sarah pressed her daughter's face against her shoulder to shield her from the debris. When she looked up again, the Apache boy was only a few yards away, crouched behind a barrel and studying the situation with intense concentration. Their eyes met across the dusty space, and Sarah saw something that took her breath away. Young stranger, this child from a people her own people often considered enemies, was looking at her and Emma with genuine concern and determination. He wasn't seeing a white woman and her daughter as potential threats or obstacles. He was seeing two human beings in desperate need of help. The boy made a series of quick hand gestures, and even though Sarah didn't understand Apache sign language, his meaning was clear. He was going to help them get to safety. He pointed toward an alley between two buildings that would provide a route away from the main battle, then held up his hand to indicate that she should wait for his signal. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. Had no choice but to trust this young stranger. The alternative was to remain trapped in the crossfire with her daughter, hoping that the bullets would somehow miss them until the fighting ended. The boy moved with remarkable skill, using the chaos of the gunfight to his advantage. When the outlaw's attention was focused on the deputies across the street, he darted forward, covering the distance between his hiding spot and the wagon in a matter of seconds. Up close, Sarah could see that despite his youth, there was a maturity and wisdom in his dark eyes that spoke of experiences far beyond his years. "I am Ayanna," he said in surprisingly good English, his voice barely audible above the gunfire. "I help you, Sarah," she whispered back, "and this is Emma." Ayanna nodded and quickly assessed their situation. The wagon provided cover from the main street, but they were exposed on one side where a gap between buildings created a potential line of fire. He studied the pattern of the gunfight, timing the intervals between volleys, calculating the best moment to move. "When I say go," Ayanna instructed, "you run to that door." He pointed to a building about 20 yards away. "I will cover you." Sarah looked at him in confusion. "Cover us? You don't have a weapon?" Ayanna smiled grimly and pulled a handful of small stones from a pouch at his waist. Apache do not always need guns to fight. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Ayanna was in motion. With deadly accuracy, he began hurling stones at strategic targets, a lantern hanging outside the saloon, a bottle sitting on a windowsill, a metal sign creaking in the wind. Each stone found its mark, creating noise and distraction that drew the attention of the combatants away from Sarah and Emma's position. "Now," Ayanna hissed. Sarah didn't hesitate. Clutching Emma tightly, she burst from behind the wagon and ran toward the building Ayanna had indicated. Behind her, she could hear the boy following, his footsteps silent despite the urgency of their flight. They reached the doorway just as a fresh volley of gunfire erupted from the street. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, gasping for breath. While Emma clung to her with desperate strength, Ayanna appeared beside them, barely winded despite their desperate sprint. "We are not safe yet," he said quietly. "We must go further." The building they had reached was the town's small church, and Ayanna led them quickly through the nave toward the back exit. Sarah marveled at how the boy seemed to know exactly where to go, as if he had studied the layout of the town extensively. "How do you know your way around so well?" she asked as they moved. "I watch," Ayanna replied simply. "My people, we learn to observe, to understand the places where we might need to go." They reached the back door of the church, and Ayanna peered out cautiously. The rear of the building faced away from the main street, providing some shelter from the ongoing battle, but they were still not completely out of danger. There, Ayanna pointed to a small house about 100 yards away, set back from the main part of town. "Mrs. Henderson, she is a kind woman. She will help." Sarah knew the house he was referring to. Martha Henderson was an elderly widow who lived alone and was known for her charitable nature. She had helped Sarah on several occasions when money was particularly tight, offering small jobs or simply sharing a meal. But reaching Mrs. Henderson's house would require crossing an open field, and Sarah wasn't sure Emma could make the distance. The little girl was already exhausted and terrified, and Sarah could feel her daughter's small body trembling with fear and fatigue. "I don't think Emma can run that far," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. Ayanna looked at the little girl with gentle eyes. "I carry her," he said simply. Emma, who had been silent since their flight from the wagon, looked up at the Apache boy with wide, frightened eyes. Sarah could see her daughter's internal struggle. She had been raised, like all the children in town, to be wary of Indians, but this boy had just risked his life to help them. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah whispered to her daughter. "Ayanna is our friend. He's going to help us get somewhere safe." Emma studied Ayanna's face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. The boy knelt down to her level, speaking in a soft, gentle voice. "I will carry you like the wind carries a feather," he said. "You will be safe." Something in his tone, or perhaps the genuine kindness in his eyes, seemed to reassure Emma. She allowed Ayanna to lift her onto his back, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Hold tight but not too tight," Ayanna instructed. "We will run, like deer through the forest." Sarah watched in amazement as the boy adjusted Emma's position to ensure her comfort and security. Despite the chaos and danger surrounding them, he was taking the time to make sure a frightened little girl felt safe. They waited for another distraction, this time, the sound of breaking glass as someone threw a chair through a window on the main street, before making their move. Ayanna ran with a fluid grace that seemed to barely disturb the ground beneath his feet, while Sarah followed as best she could, her heart pounding with exertion and fear. The open field felt like it stretched for miles, though Sarah knew it was only a matter of yards. Every step felt exposed, vulnerable, and she expected at any moment to hear the crack of a rifle or the whistle of a bullet. But Ayanna seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to find the safest path. Weaving between small rises in the ground and patches of scrub brush that provided minimal but crucial cover, they reached Mrs. Henderson's house just as the gunfight on the main street reached a crescendo. The elderly woman opened her door before they could even knock, having apparently seen them coming across the field. "Sarah, child, what are you doing out there?" Martha Henderson was a woman in her 70s, with silver hair and kind blue eyes, that had seen too much of life's hardships to be easily shocked. But even she seemed taken aback by the sight of Sarah arriving with an Apache boy carrying Emma. "Mrs. Henderson, please," Sarah gasped, still out of breath from their run. "We were caught in the crossfire. This boy, Ayanna, he saved us." Martha looked at Ayanna with curiosity rather than suspicion. "Well then, young man, you'd better come inside before someone sees you and gets the wrong idea." They hurried into the small but comfortable house, and Martha immediately began fussing over Emma, who was still clinging to Ayanna despite being safely indoors. "You poor little thing," Martha cooed, offering Emma a cup of water and a cookie from a jar on her kitchen table. "What a terrible thing to happen on such a peaceful day." Sarah sank into a chair, finally allowing herself to process what had just occurred. A young Apache boy had risked his own life to save her and her daughter, showing more courage and compassion than many adults she knew. "Ayanna," she said, looking at the boy who was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, having politely declined Martha's offer of a chair. "Why did you help us? You don't even know us." The boy considered the question seriously before answering. "My grandmother, she'll teach me that all people are connected, that when one suffers, we all suffer. When one is saved, we are all saved." Martha nodded approvingly. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Ayanna agreed. "She also teach me that courage is not about being unafraid. Courage is about doing what is right, even when you are afraid." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. This child, this boy who couldn't be more than 13 years old, had just demonstrated more wisdom and bravery than most adults she knew. The sound of gunfire from the main street was beginning to diminish, suggesting that the battle might finally be coming to an end. Through Martha's front window, they could see smoke rising from several buildings, and the acrid smell of gunpowder continued to drift through the air. "I should go," Ayanna said, starting to rise from his position on the floor. "Wait," Sarah said quickly. "It's still dangerous out there, and I haven't properly thanked you." Ayanna shook his head. "No thanks needed, is what anyone should do." But Sarah could see that wasn't true. What Ayanna had done was extraordinary, and they all knew it. He had risked his life for strangers, crossing cultural and racial boundaries that most people in their community considered insurmountable. Emma, who had been quietly eating her cookie and sipping water, suddenly spoke up. "Are you going to leave us?" she asked Ayanna, her voice small and worried. The question seemed to catch the Apache boy off guard. He looked at Emma with surprise, then at Sarah, as if seeking guidance on how to respond. He began, then stopped, clearly struggling with something. Sarah realized that Ayanna was facing a dilemma she hadn't considered. He had risked everything to save them, but now what? He couldn't simply return to his people and pretend nothing had happened. The townspeople would eventually learn of his involvement, and there could be consequences for both him and his tribe. "Where will you go?" Sarah asked gently. "I do not know," Ayanna admitted, and for the first time since she had met him, he sounded like the young boy he actually was, rather than the wise, mature protector he had been forced to become. Martha Henderson, who had been listening to the conversation while tidying her kitchen, suddenly spoke up. "Well, I know where you should go," she said firmly. "You should stay right here until we figure out what's best for everyone." Sarah looked at the elderly woman in surprise. "Mrs. Henderson, are you sure? If people find out you're harboring an Apache boy, let them talk," Martha said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I've lived in this town for 40 years, and I've never seen anyone show the kind of courage this young man just displayed. If the good people of Copper Ridge have a problem with that, then they're not as good as they think they are." Ayanna looked uncertain. "I do not wish to bring trouble to your house, child," Martha said, her voice gentle but firm. "The only trouble in this house would be if we let you walk out that door without making sure you're safe. You saved Sarah and Emma. Now it's our turn to look after you." As if to emphasize Martha's point, Emma slipped down from her chair and walked over to where Ayanna was sitting. Without a word, she climbed into his lap and curled up against his chest, her small arms wrapping around him in a gesture of complete trust and affection. Ayanna looked down at the little girl in amazement, his dark eyes soft with emotion. Sarah could see that Emma's simple act of trust had touched something deep in the boy's heart. "I think," Sarah said quietly, "that Emma has made the decision for all of us. You're not going anywhere, Ayanna, not until we know you're safe." The sound of approaching voices from outside made them all tense, but Martha peered through her curtains and relaxed. "It's just some of the townspeople checking on folks," she reported. "The shooting seems to have stopped." Indeed, the gunfire had ceased entirely, replaced by the sounds of people calling out to each other, checking for injuries, and beginning the process of assessing the damage. Sarah knew that soon enough, someone would come looking for her and Emma, wanting to make sure they were safe. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of Martha Henderson's kitchen, an extraordinary bond was forming between a young Apache boy and the white woman and child he had saved. It was a bond that would challenge everything their respective communities believed about each other, and it would test the limits of courage, compassion, and love. Ayanna looked up at Sarah, his young face serious but hopeful. "What happens now?" he asked. Sarah reached out and gently touched his shoulder, feeling the strength and resilience in this remarkable young person who had risked everything for strangers. "Now," she said softly, "we figure out how to be a family. Will their unlikely bonds survive the prejudices of their divided communities? What price will they all pay for crossing the lines that society has drawn between them? Don't miss the next chapter to discover how love can triumph over hatred and fear." 3 weeks had passed since the gunfight that had forever changed the lives of Sarah McKenna, her daughter Emma, and the young Apache boy named Ayana who had saved them from the Crossfire. What had begun as a desperate rescue had evolved into something none of them had expected. A makeshift family bound together not by blood, but by an unbreakable bond forged in moments of life and death. Martha Henderson's small house had become a sanctuary for this unlikely trio, but Sarah knew that their peaceful existence couldn't last forever. The town of Copper Ridge was buzzing with rumors and speculation about the Indian boy who had been seen during the gunfight, and it was only a matter of time before someone connected Ayana to their current living situation. Sarah had spent sleepless nights worrying about what would happen when the truth came out. The townspeople's initial gratitude for anyone who had helped during the crisis was already giving way to their more familial suspicions and prejudices. She had heard whispers in the general store, seen the sideways glances when she walked down the street with Emma. People were asking questions, and Sarah knew that the answers would not be well received by everyone. Ayana, for his part, had adapted to life in the white world with remarkable grace and intelligence. He helped Martha with household chores, learned to read English with surprising speed, and had become Emma's constant companion and protector. The little girl adored him, following him around the house and chattering endlessly about everything and nothing, secure in the knowledge that her Yana, as she had taken to calling him, would always keep her safe. But Sarah could see the strain in Ayana's eyes. He was living in a world that wasn't his own, cut off from his people and his culture, existing in a liminal space between two worlds that seemed increasingly incompatible. She knew he was making this sacrifice for them, and the weight of that responsibility was sometimes overwhelming. "You don't have to stay," she had told him one evening as they sat on Martha's front porch, watching Emma play with a wooden doll that Ayana had carved for her. "If you want to return to your people, we'll understand." Ayana had looked at her with those dark, wise eyes that seemed to hold depths far beyond his 13 years. "Where would I go?" he had asked simply. "My family. They think I am dead. I was scouting near the town when the shooting started. By now, they believe the white men killed me. We could get word to them," Sarah had suggested. "Let them know you're alive." "And then what?" Ayana had replied. "They would want me to come home, but I cannot leave you and Emma unprotected. And if I stay here, they would not understand. They would think I have been corrupted by the white world." Sarah had felt her heart break a little at his words. This brave, compassionate boy was trapped between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, and it was her fault. If she hadn't needed saving, if Emma hadn't been in danger, Ayana would still be with his people, living the life he was meant to live. The crisis that Sarah had been dreading finally came to a head on a Tuesday morning in late October. She was hanging laundry in Martha's backyard while Emma and Ayana played nearby, when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching the house. Through the wooden fence, she could see a group of men dismounting, their faces grim and determined. "Ayana," she called softly, trying to keep the alarm out of her voice. "Take Emma inside." Now the boy immediately sensed the danger, scooping Emma up in his arms and heading for the back door of the house. But before they could reach safety, the front door burst open and several men strode into the house, their boots heavy on Martha's wooden floors. Sarah recognized the leader immediately, Jake Morrison, the town's self-appointed moral authority, and one of the most vocal opponents of any kind of cooperation with the local Apache tribes. Morrison was a large man in his 50s, with graying hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to see the world in stark terms of right and wrong, with no room for nuance or compassion. "Mrs. McKenna," Morrison called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We need to talk." Sarah entered the house through the back door, her heart pounding but her chin raised defiantly. Behind Morrison stood 5 other men, including Deputy Sheriff Williams and several prominent businessmen from the town. Martha Henderson sat in her rocking chair, her face pale but her back straight with dignity. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah said evenly, "what can I do for you? You can start by telling us the truth about the Indian boy you've been harboring." Morrison replied, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for evidence of wrongdoing. "His name is Ayana," Sarah said firmly, "and he's not being harbored. He's our guest. Your guest." Morrison's voice dripped with disdain. "Mrs. McKenna, this boy is a savage, a member of a tribe that has killed white settlers, stolen our livestock, and terrorized our families for years. And you're treating him like a member of your family." "He saved my life and my daughter's life," Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He risked everything to help us when we were trapped in that crossfire. If that makes him a savage, then I wish there were more savages in this world." Deputy Williams stepped forward, his expression apologetic but determined. "Sarah, I understand your gratitude, but you have to understand our position. Having an Apache boy living in town, especially one whose whereabouts are unknown to his tribe, creates a dangerous situation for everyone." "Dangerous how?" Martha Henderson spoke up from her chair, her voice sharp with indignation. "That boy has been nothing but helpful and respectful since he's been here. He's shown more Christian charity than half the so-called Christians in this town." Morrison's face darkened at Martha's words. "Mrs. Henderson, with all due respect, you're an elderly woman living alone. You don't understand the broader implications of this situation. If the Apache tribe discovers that one of their children is missing, they might assume we've taken him by force. That could lead to retaliation against the entire town. And if they discover that we've treated one of their children with kindness and respect, Sarah countered, it might lead to better relations between our peoples. Naive? Morrison spat. Mrs. McKenna, you're a widow with a young child. You should be thinking about your daughter's safety, not conducting some misguided social experiment. It was at that moment that Emma appeared in the doorway, having apparently slipped away from Ayanna despite his efforts to keep her hidden. The little girl looked around at the group of stern-faced men with wide, frightened eyes. Mama, she said in a small voice. Where's Yana? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Here was a 4-year-old child, innocent of the prejudices and fears that divided the adult world, asking for the boy who had become her protector and friend. Morrison looked down at Emma with something that might have been pity. Little girl, he said, his voice gentler than it had been when addressing the adults. The Indian boy has to go away now. It's for the best. Emma's face crumpled, and she ran to her mother, burying her face in Sarah's skirts. I don't want Yana to go away, she sobbed. He's my friend. He keeps the bad dreams away. Sarah's heart broke as she held her daughter, feeling the child's genuine distress at the thought of losing Ayanna. Over the past 3 weeks, the boy had become more than just a protector to Emma. He had become a beloved older brother, a constant source of comfort and security in a world that had already taken away her father. Mr. Morrison, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, I'm begging you to reconsider. Ayanna isn't a threat to anyone. He's just a child who showed incredible courage and compassion. Doesn't that count for anything? It counts for a great deal, Morrison replied, and for a moment Sarah thought she detected a hint of genuine regret in his voice. But it doesn't change the reality of our situation. The boy has to go, Mrs. McKenna. The question is whether he goes peacefully or whether we have to make him go. It was then that Ayanna himself appeared in the doorway, having apparently decided that hiding was pointless. He stood straight and tall, despite his youth, his dark eyes meeting Morrison's gaze without flinching. I will go, he said simply. I do not wish to bring trouble to Sarah and Emma. No, Emma cried, breaking away from her mother and running to Ayanna. She wrapped her small arms around his waist, holding on with desperate strength. You can't go. You promised you wouldn't leave me. Ayanna knelt down to Emma's level, his young face filled with pain, but also with a gentle determination. Little sister, he said softly, sometimes we must do things we do not want to do to protect the people we love. But I love you, Emma sobbed, and Mama loves you too. Don't you love us? The question hit Ayanna like a physical blow, and Sarah could see tears forming in his eyes. I love you more than the stars in the sky, he whispered to Emma. That is why I must go. Sarah felt something break inside her chest as she watched this heartbreaking scene. This brave, wonderful boy was willing to sacrifice his own happiness to protect them from the consequences of his presence. It was an act of love so pure and selfless that it put the adults in the room to shame. There has to be another way, Sarah said desperately, looking around at the faces of the men who held Ayanna's fate in their hands. Please, he's just a child. He doesn't deserve to be punished for doing the right thing. Deputy Williams shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling with his own conscience. Sarah, maybe if we could get word to his tribe, arrange some kind of formal exchange. No, Morrison cut him off firmly. Any contact with the Apache tribe opens up negotiations we're not prepared for. The boy goes back to the wilderness, where he belongs. And that's the end of it. The wilderness. Martha Henderson stood up from her chair, her eyes blazing with indignation. Mr. Morrison, you're talking about abandoning a child in the desert? That's not justice, that's murder. It's survival, Morrison replied coldly. His survival, and ours. Ayanna gently disentangled himself from Emma's embrace and stood up, facing the group of men with a dignity that was remarkable for someone so young. I understand your fears, he said, his English clear and precise. But I want you to know that not all Apache are your enemies. Some of us believe that our peoples can live in peace. Pretty words, Morrison said dismissively, but words don't stop arrows or bullets. Neither does hatred, Ayanna replied quietly. I have lived among you for 3 weeks. I have seen your kindness, your love for your families, your desire to build something good in this hard land. These are the same things my people want. For a moment, the room was silent, except for Emma's quiet sobbing. Sarah could see that words had affected some of the men, particularly Deputy Williams, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, but Morrison remained unmoved. You have until sunset to be gone from this town, he said firmly. If you're seen here after dark, you'll be arrested and held until we can decide what to do with you. And if his tribe comes looking for him, Sarah asked desperately, what then? Then we'll deal with that situation when it arises, Morrison replied. But we won't have it said that we harbored one of their warriors. He's not a warrior, Sarah protested. He's a child who saved lives. He's an Apache, Morrison said with finality, and that's all that matters. As the men prepared to leave, Deputy Williams lingered behind, his expression troubled. Sarah, he said quietly, I'm sorry about this, I truly am, but Morrison's right about one thing. Having the boy here does create risks for everyone. What about the risk to him? Sarah asked. You're sending a 13-year-old boy out into the desert alone. How is that protecting anyone? Williams. I had no answer for that, and after a moment of uncomfortable silence, he followed the other men out of the house. The rest of the day passed in a haze of grief and desperate planning. Sarah tried everything she could think of, appealing to the town council, seeking support from other families, even considering taking Emma and fleeing with Ayanna to another territory. But every option seemed to lead to more danger, not less. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Ayanna made his final preparations to leave. He had few possessions, just the clothes on his back and a small pouch containing some personal items, but he spent considerable time carving a small wooden horse for Emma, working with intense concentration to get every detail perfect. This is for you to remember me, he told Emma as he presented her with the gift. Whenever you feel scared or lonely, you hold this and remember that somewhere, your big brother Yana is thinking about you and sending you all his love. Emma clutched the wooden horse to her chest, tears streaming down her face. I don't want to remember you, she sobbed. I want you to stay. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, her own tears falling freely now. Sometimes, sweetheart, the people we love have to go away. But that doesn't mean they stop loving us, and it doesn't mean we stop loving them. Will I ever see Yana again? Emma asked, looking up at her mother with heartbreaking hope. Sarah looked at Ayanna, seeing her own pain reflected in his young face. I don't know, baby, she whispered. I hope so. As darkness fell, Ayanna prepared to leave through the back door of Martha's house, hoping to avoid any confrontation with Morrison's men. But as he reached for the door handle, Sarah suddenly grabbed his arm. Wait, she said urgently. I'm coming. With you? Ayanna stared at her in shock. Sarah? No, you cannot. Emma needs you here. Safe. Emma needs both of us, Sarah replied firmly. And I can't let you walk out into that desert alone. I won't, Mama. Emma looked up at her mother with confusion and fear. Are we going away? Sarah looked down at her daughter, then at Ayanna, then at Martha Henderson, who was watching the scene with tears in her eyes. In that moment, she made a decision that would change all their lives forever. Yes, sweetheart, she said, lifting Emma into her arms. We're going on an adventure, all three of us, together. Martha stepped forward, pressing a bag of supplies into Sarah's hands. There's food, water, and some money, she said quietly. It's not much, but it might help. Mrs. Henderson, Sarah began, but the elderly woman cut her off. You're doing the right thing, child, Martha said firmly. That boy saved your lives, and now you're saving his. That's what family does for each other. As they prepared to leave, Ayanna looked at Sarah with an expression of wonder and gratitude. You would leave everything for me? He asked quietly. You left everything for us, Sarah replied simply. That's what love means, Ayanna. We don't abandon the people who matter to us. They slipped out into the night, three unlikely companions, bound together by circumstances that had tested their courage and revealed the depths of their capacity for love. Behind them, they left the safety and familiarity of the only home Emma had ever known. Ahead of them lay uncertainty, danger, and the challenge of building a new life in a world that didn't seem to have a place for families like theirs. But as they walked into the darkness, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. They were together, they were free, and they had each other. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family forged not by blood or tradition, but by the unbreakable bonds of love, sacrifice, and mutual protection. The young Apache boy who had pulled a single mother from the dust of a crossfire had given her more than just her life back. He had given her a new understanding of what family could mean, and she was determined never to let go of that precious gift. A powerful story of how love transcends all boundaries and how true family is created through sacrifice and devotion. Like, if you believe in the power of chosen family, subscribe for more inspiring stories of courage and love, and share to remind everyone that compassion knows no color or culture. Legal notice. This story is completely fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. The characters, events, and situations described are products of imagination and do not represent real facts. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental.